There is a young cowboy, he lives on the range. His horse and his cattle are his only companions. He works in the saddle.
Greetings, everyone. Brad here with Mild-Mannered EDC. Who doesn't like a little James Taylor? I like a little James Taylor. But we're not here to talk about James Taylor today, but we are here to talk about a different James, and that is the James brand Carter. That's right, the James brand Carter EDC Pocketknife. Very interesting knife, very interesting company, actually. And it's a company that I've had my eye on for a while. I never actually purchased a knife. There's a couple of reasons for that. But I've been watching James brand for some time, and part of the reason for that is they just do a ton of marketing. They're a really, really marketing-focused company, and I'm not knocking them for that, right? I mean, they're trying to sell their products, and good marketing, good packaging, good marketing, good impressions are a big part of that. So I'm not. Don't take that as a criticism, but it is something that sometimes you have to be a little skeptical of too. You can't just assume that just because the marketing is great that the products are great as well. And so I've always been a little hesitant, and we'll talk about. I've been a little hesitant for price as well, and we'll talk about that. But all that said, the reason I ended up picking this up was I think it came across in my Instagram feed that this had won the 2020 EDC of the Year award.
Oh, look at you.
And I was like, okay. Where did that award come from? Who's awarding it this? And it turns out it's from a group called Karyology. And if you don't know who Karyology is, that's okay, because I don't either, or I didn't know who they were. So I looked them up, and sure enough, they are a sort of reviewing online entity that reviews things, a lot of bags and stuff like that, but they also have an EDC category, and in this category, they selected for 2020 the James brand Carter. I think the other runners-up were the Leatherman Free, I think it was Leatherman Free, and a wallet of some variety. I don't even remember the name. But yeah, so there's Karyology, and they awarded this their 2020 EDC item of the year. Okay, there you go. So, so I kind of wanted to see that. I mean, and again, it kind of gets back to this notion of the marketing. and who, if you're not in the knife community, how is that playing? Anyways, well, whatever. So I'm going to talk, we're just going to do a mild-mannered review here. And then I'm going to talk a little bit in the end of sort of my impressions, having now purchased one, what I sort of think of James brand. Is it a company I'm still interested in? I'm going to keep looking at, maybe pick up additional knives, etc., or maybe not. So if you want to just do the review or check out the review, that's great. I'm going to get underway here in just a second. Thanks for indulging me in a little bit of a longer opening here. And then if you want to go ahead and skip ahead to the final thoughts and summary and overview, go ahead and feel free to do that as well. Or if you want to do me a favor with the YouTube algorithm, go ahead and stay here for the duration, because YouTube loves that long view time, right? So, anyways, since we're doing YouTube real quick, thanks so much if you're a subscriber to the channel. I really appreciate your support. If you're new to the channel, it would be awesome to have you join us here in the Mild-Mannered family. Please consider subscribing, hit that subscribe button, and don't miss a video. So here we go. Let's go ahead and talk about this knife. So we've got a 2.75-inch blade on this James brand Carter. That gives you an overall of 6.55 inches with a weight of about 3 ounces. No, in fact, 3 ounces on the money. So there you go. So very much a smaller EDC as they go. EDC pocket knife, that is. So let's do a couple of size comparisons, probably the most apropos in my opinion. Here is the Benchmade bug out. So you can see it quite a bit smaller than the bug out in terms of overall length, although it's quite a bit fatter, thicker, if you will. And, kind of has some other differences there, but yeah, there you go. That's kind of a little thicker blade stock as well, but yeah, so there you go. That's what we got there with the Benchmade bug out. How about this rat number 1? And how about a Spyderco Delica? They do share the same steel after all. So there you go. That's what. Oops, sorry, I see I'm a little low there on the screen. I'm not always looking at the screen here. There you go. Okay, so that's what we've got for size comparisons. Now, let's go ahead and get underway with our classic mild-mannered review of the James brand Carter. When we do our classic mild-mannered review, right, we talk blade, we talk action, scales and hardware, and then ergos and carry. So let's get underway with the blade. So you've got a very nice, very attractive, satin finished VG10 steel drop point blade with fairly minimal markings. As you can see, I think there it is, VG10 steel. There you go, right down there. And the James brand logo on this side right there. Obviously, this sort of limey green, sort of pillared, I don't know what you call it, pillared thumb study, sort of thumb disky kind of thing. Here used for actuation, so that is on the blade. But I have to say, this knife came quite sharp, and it has a relatively good grind. It's not the thinnest grind I've ever come across, but it's pretty darn decent. And, overall, it's a very sterile, attractive looking blade, right? I mean, it's nothing overly dramatic or anything groundbreaking, but it's definitely a very good functional blade shape, good tall flat grind. Yeah, I mean, it's just an attractive blade. A lot to like about it. Obviously, the grind, I think, is done quite well. If you can see that here, there you go. You've got this choil for sharpening. Everybody likes that. So yeah, I mean, it's fine. And for VG10 steel, yeah, there you go. So that's what we've got here with the blade. Now let's talk about action. Action is interesting. It does use what they call their ambidextrous slide lock, right? It's just a version of the axis lock from Benchmade, but no harm, no foul there, right? Because the axis lock has expired, so they are free to use their own version of that. With that, you can actually open this knife a few ways. You can use your finger here, index finger or your middle finger, I suppose, to flick it open. There you go. You can thumb disc it open with your thumb, and you can just do this by pulling back on the ambidextrous slide lock here. Now, I will say that this doesn't quite have it's got a bit of a kind of a detent issue there. And that issue, that's not the right word, but it does have a little bit of a tension, right? For lack of a better word. I guess detent is not the right thing to say because it's not a detent per se.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't.
But there is a bit of a tension there. So this blade is not going to just fall open and you can see when you pull back on the slide lock, the blade doesn't just fall open. But when you give a little flick to it with your wrist, yeah, it flies right open and closes back down. Same thing when it's open though as well. When you slide this back, it's not necessarily going to just fall shut. Now that may change a bit with time. I've only had this a few weeks, but it may very well change. It may get smoother, maybe a bit more, sort of axis locky in terms of open shut kind of action, fall shuttiness. But there you go. And it is running on phosphor bronze washers, which is a nice touch. Nothing to complain about there. So overall, I think it's got a pretty darn decent action. A good action. It's got a good action. It's smooth. It's not the most whatever, but it's pretty darn fidgetable. And I've never had an issue opening or closing this knife at all. Now, it did come quite centered and still, I think, remains pretty much dead on centered. Slightest hint of blade play if you hold it just sort of right, and just the slightest bit of blade rock. Now, again, I could probably tighten this up a bit. I haven't. I've just been using it, not doing that. I actually just was camping recently and took this with me as well. But, I mean, it's not necessarily uncommon with this kind of lock, to be honest with you, but it's not a safety issue. It's not a functionality issue. But for those of us that, kind of really look at those sort of things, there is a little bit there. And so I think it warrants mention. So that's what we've got here on the action. If you like kind of those multiple modes of deployment and sort of fidgeting, this could be something you might be interested in. Now, let's talk scales and hardware. So for this particular variant, and this particular variant is $139, goes up to about $159 depending on if you go with my card or whatever. I just went with this gray G10, which I actually thought looked nice with the green, sort of limey green pop on the thumb disky pillar thing. Calling it a thing. That's the kind of details you get here on the Mild Mannered channel descriptions.
I love lamp.
But yeah, so you've got that. You've got a stainless steel pocket clip. Yeah, it's a big one. G10 backspacer, stainless steel hardware and liners. It does actually have nested liners, which is a nice touch. Nothing to, can you see that? Yeah, I think maybe a little bit. Nothing to complain about there at all. So, a lot of standard things here on this knife and nothing groundbreaking, but nothing poorly done either. So the G10 is very well, it's quite smooth, but it still has a little bit of texture. There's no sharp spots. Everything's well chamfered. I didn't mention that on the blade, but yeah, the blade spine, everything is well chamfered here. So no complaints there at all. Well executed in terms of sort of the fit and finish of the scales and hardware, in my opinion. And we'll talk about the clip here momentarily. So let's talk about Ergos and Kary. So the Ergos of the knife, it is a small knife. So if you have big old hands, I'm not sure that this is going to be ideal for you. But for my hands, this fits quite well. Resting my thumb on this, I'm not actually much of a thumb disc kind of guy for most knives, but because of the way this is sort of pillared and the way that kind of sits there, yeah, I kind of like it, actually. I do kind of like it. And it's sort of in a natural spot where you can just kind of put your thumb right there as you're doing work or doing whatever. And I tend to hold my knives like this. So when I'm doing stuff, or even frankly like this, is kind of an interesting thing to be able to put your finger there in a comfortable way. So yeah, in a lot of ways, I mean, the Ergos are pretty darn decent, with the exception of this big old clip. And this clip is very, very big, and it's very predominant. It's very deep carry as well, which is nice. But boy, I mean, and look how far it kind of sticks up above the knife there. Yeah, it's interesting choice. Big squared off kind of a thing. So you do get a hot spot off that, particularly right back here. I don't know what else to tell you. It is just sort of that way. Now, from an Ergos standpoint, is that, the end of all things? No, not at all. And Ergos, as we've mentioned before, can be quite subjective. So I'm not going to totally knock it on that. The other thing you might notice, and I didn't mention this in scales and hardware, and I should have, this actually does come with a replaceable lanyard. So if you want to get rid of the clip, you can replace it with a lanyard post that comes with in the box. So you are able to do that, but you can't have a lanyard and a clip at the same time. So if you're a lanyard person, it's going to be a lanyard and not a clip, or if you want to just have the clip. So anyways, just kind of an interesting way of how they did that. So there you go with Ergos. Now Kary, I actually found this Kary is quite nice. It slides into the pocket fine. There's pretty decent tension and spring here on this relatively large and branded pocket clip. The pocket clip is fully ambidextrous, which makes this knife a fully ambidextrous knife sort of across the board, right? Because of the they're aptly named ambidextrous slide lock. And yeah, so this can be pulled out. You take the screws out, pull it out, switch it around, and there you go. You've got an ambi knife. Now, again, this clip though, I don't know. It's not the worst clip in the world, but it's kind of, I just think it's kind of ugly. I think that's my problem with it. I just don't like the look of it. And it sort of ruins a little bit of the knife for me. Now, again, whatever. I guess I can't harp on that too much. It does its job. It functions just fine. It's not the most ideal clip, and it's not my favorite clip of any clip. I mean, it's certainly, this is a far superior clip in my view, but it's not a piece of junk or anything either. So where does that leave us on this knife? And this is where I was talking about at the beginning. I wanted to offer a few insights here. So at least insights in my mind. In many ways, this is kind of a boring knife, right? I mean, in the same ways that the bug out is kind of a boring knife. I mean, but the bug out's also a phenomenal knife. I mean, it's just a fantastic knife. And so is this equally fantastic, even though it's boring? I don't know. I mean, I'm honestly, you can hear it in my voice. I'm just sort of torn on this knife. On some level, I actually kind of like this knife a lot. On another level, I'm like, $139 for G10 and VG10 steel, and okay, a little bit of a different look and feel, but also a very generic looking little knife. And again, little being the key word. There's not a lot of knife here to begin with, so I feel like there's a lot of marketing. That's where I keep coming back to, is there's just a lot of marketing around this knife and around the James brand. This is not a groundbreaking knife. This is not blowing your socks off kind of knife. I mean, it's cool. It's a nice EDC. It's a perfectly functional, well-made, well-executed EDC knife. Is it award-winning and groundbreaking? Well, it is technically award-winning, I guess. Is it groundbreaking or overly interesting? No. In my opinion, it is just not. It is simply not. That doesn't make it bad or not something you might be interested in. And some people may go, "What are you talking about, Brad? It's a beautiful knife. I love the looks on that knife. The interesting thumb disc approach, and combined with the slide lock, and the super deep carry clip. I mean, there's plenty that people can like about this knife. And this isn't a knife that I hate by any stretch, but it's not a knife that I'm just torn on it. I feel like I'm just sort of like, eh. And I feel like the marketing way oversells this particular knife. I mean, it's a good knife, but it is not the be-all, end-all. And James Brand in general, right, with their marketing and this whole notion of sort of designed in Portland. So it sort of has this Oregon knife heritage that they want to sort of attribute to it. But this is a Chinese-made knife, and nothing wrong with that at all. I own many, some of my favorite knives. But for some people, that may be a problem. But again, the marketing sort of playing there, right? It's designed in Portland. Therefore, it must have this, there are superior designers in Portland or something like that. I mean, I don't know. It's just a weird, yeah. So for me, and I'll be honest with you, I'm a little put off by that Karyology business. It just feels misleading. And particularly since I think the niche that they are trying to sell this knife to is not necessarily people like me who spend a lot of time with knives, have a lot of interest in different types of knives. That marketing doesn't really sway me one way or another. I picked it up because I wanted to see if the marketing held up. And I will say this is a fine knife. I mean, is it an EDC of the year type knife? No. It's not, in my opinion, but that doesn't mean it's not a good knife. So anyway, I know this is a bit of a rant, a bit of a babble here. I'm sorry. And for those of you, thanks for sticking with me if you have this far. This is a fine knife. James Brand Carter is a good knife. It's nothing, I think it's a bit overpriced for G10 and VG10 steel, but it's not a bad EDC knife. And if you like the looks of it and it's speaking to you, by all means, give it a look. I probably am going to stand pat for a bit on the James Brand stuff because, again, I think you're buying the brand. You're buying the brand as much as you are buying anything sort of new and interesting in the knife world. So there you go. That's my 2 cents on this for what it's worth, and it's worth exactly what you paid for it right there. But I hope you've enjoyed this review. And again, thanks so much for all the support with the channel. Really, really do appreciate it. Most importantly, though, as we always talk about here on this channel, stay safe out there. Be mild-mannered to one another. And all the best.
Goodbye, sweet baby Jane. Deep greens and blues are the colors.